Well, the truth is there is no typical workday here at UNHQ.
It's hard to say what a typical day is like, to be honest. It can be very varied. There are days when I only translate, there are days when I only do précis-writing, but there might be days that I go into meetings, there might be days that we go over to the secretariat to actually take notes on a meeting.
Either picking up on a job that I've already been assigned or being assigned a new job. Being this being the English translation service, there's often snacks interspersed throughout the day.
Okay, so a typical workday, they've been quite varied since I've been here, but a typical workday when I'm doing translation would be translating various types of document from French or Spanish into English, and using eLuna, which is a translation software tool, and often doing some research to help with that.
These days my typical workday involves revision, which is an addition to translation. I translate myself, but also after a decade working at the UN, I can, with the experience that I've gained, I suppose, I can help other people. Together we're working towards producing the best end product that we have.
There is really no typical workday, and that is, I would say, one of the attractive aspects of the job that we have here. The nature of the translations that we do here at the English Service are quite different from what the other services do. We get submissions from member states, and those are letters or other types of correspondence. They may be reports, they may be information that has been requested by the General Assembly or by the Security Council, and those documents are not one, there isn't one that looks like the other.
Every day is different. One day I might be working on a Security Council committee that's dealing with sanctions against North Korea, or an arms embargo in Africa, and the next day I might be translating a letter from the ambassador of Cote d'Ivoire or from Venezuela. So no 2 days are the same.
Because even though it's generally perceived and truly can be a solitary task, translation, and very individual task, the collegiality in the English service makes it a place that's particularly friendly to asking a colleague how they would tackle a particular translation problem.
I can consult with other revisers, there's 360 feedback, I can suggest changes, and then the person I translate has an opportunity to come back to me as a reviser and say sometimes, well, why did you do this, or do you think something else might be better? And we come to a consensus. It's not a dictatorship. We're all working, as I say, to produce the best product we can, and that's the one house approach that we've taken.
That's a challenge, actually, that the work is so varied, because you have to be a master of many different skills to work here.
So we have a variety of documents that we get to deal with every day. We also get to do things like, for example, in my role, I get to work on terminology as well. I have expertise or experience with Arabic, and at the moment there are a lot of documents that come in with Arabic place names that have to be rendered correctly into English, and so I spend a good deal of my time working on that also. We also do précis-writing, as I'm sure some of the people who if you've taken a look at the website, you'll be aware that's something that we do, and so that's so I get to do a lot of that also.
So précis-writing, that involves us going into a meeting in a team, and then we take notes from the meeting. So they have translators do that because the meeting's happening in various different languages.
We take notes. We try and get as many paper statements as we possibly can from the delegations and from the conference officers. We can sometimes record the meeting on our laptops, and we take all of that back with us to our offices, and then we have a certain amount of time to produce the summary record of the meeting.
It's an activity that draws upon your translation skills, and at the same time draws upon your creativity and your strengths as a writer, which is probably one of the things I appreciate the most about it. Whereas in a translation, you are married to the text. In précis-writing, you're going in to summarize, and your target is about a third to, in some cases, a half of the original material that you're summarizing.
And then the final product is the official record of that meeting for the UN.
The thing I like most about it is that it gets us out of our offices, it gets us into the meeting rooms, we get to interact a little bit with delegates and other people at the United Nations, and it provides a lot of variety in our work.
It's an opportunity to get away from your desk for one thing. Like, I really love translating, but it's nice to have a change of pace and do something different. You also get to be in meetings where you really get to see what's going on at the UN. Sometimes there's quite high level people there, so that can be quite exciting. It's a good opportunity as well just to hear your languages being spoken. Obviously as translators we're often reading, but it's nice to be able to keep your ear in a bit, I think, so I enjoy that aspect of it as well.
I like the feeling of being at the centre of sort of global affairs. I mean, I buy a copy of the New York Times every morning on my way to work and read it and on the way. And when I get to work, I find quite often that my work is about all the things I've just been reading about in the newspaper.
It's a very friendly and supportive working environment. It's a really nice job for learning. You get to learn lots of new stuff all the time, so it doesn't get too stale or boring.
I'm quite often there with some very eminent people, some very eminent economists or politicians.
You go on these, what some people would call a wild goose chase, but still, I think they're extremely gratifying, and you learn things that you learn things every day.
I've always liked translation. I did a master's degree in translation and interpretation. I've tried my hand at both, and I came to the conclusion that I was better suited in terms of temperament to translation.
So I like the variety in my job, especially at headquarters. It's very varied, but the main thing I like the most is revision. Obviously I started off as a translator and then moved up into revision, and I really enjoy revision because it gives you an opportunity to train and teach colleagues of lower grades and help other people basically, and work in collaboration with your team players.
You have a time to think, and as an interpreter, obviously it's split-second decisions, and it's more stressful. I think translation is a good balance for people like me who like accuracy but also like a bit more time to consider, to ponder, maybe to reflect, and then to decide. So it's been a learning process for me. I've learned a lot about myself having been an interpreter and a translator, but for me I think it's the best balance.
My colleagues are all, without exception, very inquisitive people. They're very intelligent, and there's always someone who I can turn to if I have a question, and if I don't get an answer, I'll certainly come away knowing more about what the question is or what the issue is, and have a better idea of how to get the answer that I'm looking for.
It's very varied, and I got to rub shoulders very discreetly, but I get to rub shoulders with some very eminent people.
So I started my UN career in Geneva, where I worked for specialised agencies, various specialised agencies. So I freelanced there for 5 years, and then I was recruited to my first permanent post with the UN to ECLAC, that's the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean in Santiago, Chile. And I worked there as a permanent translator, editor, report writer, mainly with economic texts and social demographic texts. And then I transferred from ECLAC to headquarters, and I've been at headquarters now for 4.5 years, and So now I'm doing very different work here compared to ECLAC, because ECLAC is very specialised, whereas here it's much more political documents and précis writing as well, as opposed to report writing. So I've worked in 3 duty stations.
I started my professional life at the UN in Vienna at UNOF, United Nations Office at Vienna, which is a very small office, and I was in a section of 2 people, myself and a more senior reviser at the time, and it was great if you like autonomy and you like to be accountable, and you have a lot more authority in many ways, and it's a steep learning curve, but it's really beneficial. It stood me in good stead when I eventually transferred to New York, UNHQ, and I got a promotion basically straight away after arriving here, based on everything I'd learned at a smaller duty station, and I felt very confident with my experience in a smaller station, and so I'd recommend it. Also, Vienna is so beautiful, and there's so many opportunities outside of work. I mean, if you like skiing in the winters, or if you like rollerblading on the Donauinsel in the summer.
Yes, for the UN I've worked essentially at 2 duty stations. I started off in Addis Ababa, working for the Economic Commission for Africa, before moving here to New York. In Addis, the work is a little different from the work we do in New York. There, the translator also doubles as an editor, and the editorial work that you do is more akin to what a report writer would do, but in the sense that you have to more or less help the original authors express themselves the way they should express themselves. So you do a lot of that. It's more correction than editing, because the editorial work in New York is a little different. It's more, there's less intervention in the text than you would have in a duty station like Addis Ababa. Whereas there are many people who write texts for whom English is not their first language, but they are, well, not forced, but they generally write in English, and so it's a little stilted sometimes, and you have to help them clean it up. In addition to meeting UN standards in terms of style and editorial conventions and so on. Basically, you have to help them just express themselves cleanly and succinctly.
It's looking for people who can translate from 2 of the official languages other than English. Most of us have French and Spanish, but we're always very keen to find people who have Russian, Arabic, or dare I say it, Chinese.
I don't know if there's one specific thing the UN is looking for, but it looks for professionalism, dedication to duty, an ability to work hard, an ability to keep deadlines, and can always produce work of the highest quality that you can manage in the time allowed. I could go on. It helps if you have a willingness to always be learning and a willingness to develop continuously.
Other than someone who is a good linguist, we're looking for someone who's a good thinker. You have to be able to look at the text that you are translating, and you have to analyze it from not only from a linguistic perspective, but from the perspective of content. Because again, what a translator does, you're translating not only words, but those words have to convey an idea, and the idea is the most important thing. So you can't be fixated on the language. If you're very good with turning the language around into English, that's only the first step. The meaning, if you don't convey the meaning accurately and with the right nuance and the right tone, then you're not doing a complete translation. And so that's a very important element. You have to do a lot of research because you're going to be dealing with with subjects and topics that you've probably never dealt with before. So you can't just simply be a good linguist and expect to do a good job here.
Well, apart from the obvious requirement of command of their languages, strong writing skills. A translator is, among other things, a writer.
The UN needs people who can write good English, and because a lot of our work involves writing what are called summary records of meetings, and of course, as a translator, you have to have a very, very good command of English, because the documents that come out of our service are read all over the world and are influential and important. So our English has to be impeccable.
Well, to be a UN translator, I think the most important skill that you need is the ability to write clearly, succinctly, in English in our case. There is often the perception that the UN has some sort of model that it's set up, one size fits all type of translator, but I don't think that is the case.
You have to be able to fit in an international and diverse workplace, but one of the most important things is that you have to be a nice and sympathetic colleague. You have to be someone who can get on with everybody, and I guess you do your best to tick some of those boxes some of the time.
All we need is someone who has a pretty good understanding of second or third language and expressing it clearly in English, in a language that everybody can understand, whether they're native speakers of English or people from any other country in the world that use English as their everyday language of communication. I think that's essentially the skill that we need here.
So I remember that the application form took quite a long time to fill in, so I would say make sure you give yourself enough time to do that. The process was quite long, I remember. There's a bit of time between when you apply and when you hear whether you've been invited to the exam. Since working here, I've learned that's because there's actual UN translators are looking at your application quite carefully.
It took a long time between the time I first expressed an interest in taking the language competitive examination and getting the result, and then starting the recruitment process. It took a very long time. It took more than 2 years, in fact. But it was worth it.
Well, I think the best thing that you can do to prepare for the exam is to, number one, is to brush up on your second language, because your second language with the English translation service is crucial. So the bar, although it is not as high for your second language as your first language, is still a critical element, and you need to be prepared for that. So do spend some time working on that, looking at text.
I can confirm all of my colleagues are outstandingly good at what they do, and I'm very proud to call them my colleagues, and they've been through the same ordeal as me, and here we are, and it's really worth it once you've made it through.
It was a little slow. I did the 2008 competition, so I applied in 2008, did the exam in early 2009. I was interviewed, I remember, in August 2009, and I finally found that I passed in September 2009. But it actually took about 2 years, or even 2.5 years, before I was actually recruited for all sorts of different reasons. So that was my experience, but I know people who've been recruited more quickly, and I'm sure there are people who it takes even longer for.
There's not too much preparation that a candidate can do for the examination itself, but you do have to prepare for the oral part, the interview part of the process, and then recruitment itself. Once you're on the roster, can take quite a while. The machinery of the UN works rather slowly, but it's very thorough.
Okay, so to prepare for the LCE, there are some practice tests on the UN Korea's website. So I did all the practice tests, and I think those were pretty helpful. And I read French and Spanish newspapers, and yeah, I think that was very helpful just in terms of building up my vocabulary and being aware of what was going on current events wise.
And the other thing is to look at your style, how you write, because what we're looking for is someone who can render the foreign text or the foreign language into idiomatic, straightforward, uncomplicated English. It doesn't mean it's you're expected to turn it into something a fifth grader can understand. No, that's not the point. But the point is to make it as easy on the reader as possible and make it as clear as possible.
And then after I passed the exam, it was about 2 years before I had a job offer, and then another 6 months before I ended up moving. So it's definitely worth it, but that is something to bear in mind, that there can be a long time between when you apply and when you're actually offered a job.